Good morning, children. This is English for class 11. So, let's begin. Before that, let me tell you something. Please don't forget to read, revise all the lessons. Yes, read again and again with proper understanding. Note down all the important questions and answers. Not only important, all questions and answers. In case you do not know the meaning of a particular word, please look up in your dictionary, okay, or Google and find out. Otherwise, you'll not be able to answer the questions correctly. You should know the meanings of all the words that you come across. So, let's begin, cadets. Today we are going to do questions and answers from the story The Birth. The first one. Why was Joe Morgan waiting for Andrew? Joe Morgan and his wife had been married nearly 20 years and were expecting their first child. At nearly midnight, Joe was worried and walked up and down, waiting for Andrew to reach Bringaur. So that's the first question. Short answer type, children. Okay, now the second one. Andrew now felt dull and listless. Give 2 reasons. On Joe Morgan's call, Andrew along with Joe set out for Joe's house. The night air was cool and deep with quiet mystery, but Andrew felt dull and listless. It was past midnight and he was thinking about his own relationship with Christine, the girl he loved. The next question, children. What did Andrew notice as he entered Joe's house? As Andrew entered the door of number 12, he was in a dilemma. Yes, what dilemma was Andrew caught in? After an hour-long struggle, the child was born lifeless and the mother was in a critical state. Andrew was torn between his desire to attempt to save the child and his obligation towards the mother. He overcame the dilemma instinctively. He gave the child to the nurse and turned his attention to Susan Morgan, the mother. How did he revive the mother to revive Susan Morgan, who lay collapsed and almost pulseless? Andrew smashed a glass ampule instantly and injected the medicine. Then he flung down the hypodermic syringe and worked ceaselessly to revive the almost lifeless woman. After a few minutes of intense effort, her heart strengthened and she was safe. What did Andrew think was wrong with the child? What did he do? Andrew saw the child was a perfectly formed boy. The head lolled on a thin neck and limbs seemed boneless. He knew that the whiteness meant asphyxia pallida. He thought of the treatment he remembered being used at the Samaritan. He applied the same to the stillborn child. What was the treatment given to the child? Andrew hurried the child from one basin filled with cold water to the one with warm water. He continued his efforts for half an hour to no avail. Yes. Then what did he do? He rubbed the child with a rough towel, crushing and releasing the little chest with both his hands till he finally gave a cry. He had no premonition that his night call would prove unusual, still less that it would influence the whole future in Blanley. His whole future in Blanley. What was the unusual event in store for him? At nearly midnight, when Andrew reached Bringaur, he found Joe Morgan waiting for him. Joe and his wife had been married nearly 20 years and were expecting their first child. He accompanied Joe to his place where after an hour-long harsh struggle, the child was born lifeless and the mother was in a critical state. Andrew was torn between his desire to save the child and his obligation towards the mother. After he revived Susan Morgan, he turned his attention to the child. It was a perfectly formed boy, asphyxiated. He struggled to save the child and finally succeeded. Having saved 2 lives in the course of the night, his future in Blaneley seemed to hold promise. His reason told him that all these marriages were dismal failures. What are the reasons that make him reach this conclusion? Andrew was skeptical. About relationships because of what he had closely observed. His thoughts were serious and confused. The episode he had witnessed at Cardiff Station still obsessed him. He thought of Bramwell unwisely devoted to a woman who betrayed him. He thought of Edward Page committed to the quarrelsome Blodwin. His thoughts turned to Denny, living unhappily away from his wife. His reason told him that all these marriages were dismal failures. It was a conclusion which made him cringe in his present state. The conflict between his cynical mind and his heart eager to love left him bitter and confused. Andrew's visit to the Morgans gave him pleasure and satisfaction that he had not achieved earlier. Justify this. At 3:30, after an hour's difficult struggle, the child was born lifeless. Andrew attempted to revive the mother, who lay collapsed and almost pulseless. He injected the medicine and struggled to restore the lifeless Susan Morgan, and after a few minutes of intense effort, her heartbeat became steady. Andrew then turned his attention to the lifeless baby. He inferred the condition was caused by lack of oxygen in the baby's blood. He initiated the artificially induced method of respiration, pouring cold water into one basin and warm into the other. He rushed the child from one basin to the next for 15 minutes. As his last resort, he rubbed the child with a rough towel, crushing and releasing the little chest with both his hands, trying to get breath into that limp body. Then miraculously the tiny chest began heaving and they heard the child's cry. He had saved 2 lives and was eternally relieved at having done something real at last. What was the old woman's fear? How did Andrew reassure her? When the old woman returned with a cup of tea, Andrew smiled faintly. He noticed the old woman, her wisdom in experience, and realized that there had been a period of waiting. She was afraid he would leave the case, saying he would return later, but he assured her that he would not run away. What were the only sounds that Andrew heard in the thick of the night? As Andrew sat by the kitchen fire, he noticed that it was still night. The only sound that he could hear was the crackle of embers in the fireplace, the slow tick-tock of the wall clock, and Morgan's footsteps as he moved to and fro in the street outside. What was weighing on Andrew's mind as he waited with the patient? Andrew's thoughts were heavy and muddled. Muddled means confused. The episode he had witnessed at Cardiff, that because of that he had that some sort of fear in his mind. Fear gripped him and made him gloomy, sad. He thought of Bramwell, foolishly loyal to a woman who deceived him. He thought of Edward Page. Yes, all these things. Denny living unhappily apart from his wife. Why does the writer say the old woman's meditation had pursued a different course? While Andrew was thinking about the futility of marriage and relationships, the old woman was thinking about her daughter. She was concerned about both the mother and the child. Yes, she said that her daughter Susan did not want chloroform as it would harm the baby. She really looked forward for having the child. He had no premonition that this night call would prove unusual. Still less it would influence his whole future in Blanley. What was the unusual event in the store for him? At nearly midnight, when Andrew reached Bingower, he found Joe Morgan waiting for him. Joe and his wife had been married nearly 20 years and were expecting their first child. He accompanied Joe to his place, where after an hour-long harsh struggle, the child was born lifeless and the mother was in a critical state. Andrew was torn between his desire to save the child and his obligation towards the mother. After he revived Susan Morgan, he turned his attention to the child. It was perfectly formed boy, asphyxiated, So that was the thing. Having saved 2 lives in the course of the night, his future in Blanley seemed to hold promise. His reason told him that all these marriages were dismal failures. What were the reasons? Andrew was skeptical about relationships because of what he had observed, and all these examples he was giving of Edward Page and all that Denny. Yeah, so he thought that his marriage also would be a dismal failure. Andrew's visit to the Morgans gave him pleasure and satisfaction justified. At 3:30, after an hour's difficult struggle, the child was born lifeless. Andrew attempted to revive the mother, who lay collapsed and almost pulseless. So finally he revived him and revived her. Andrew then turned his attention to the baby. He inferred his condition was caused because of lack of oxygen, and then he poured the baby into hot and cold water alternately, and this was done for 15 minutes, and then he was able to save the child. If you work to respect the feelings, yearnings and desires of others, success is always yours. Explained on the basis of the lesson Birth by A.J. Cronin. Children, critical thinking. This is based on critical thinking. You get long answer type of 5 marks in the examination. It is there in the format formulated by the CBSE. So such questions are quite likely. Means this type, I mean to say, not this one. Dr. Andrew Manson respected the feelings of the Morgan family. He had gone there to assist Mrs. Morgan in childbirth. It was a difficult task because Mrs. Morgan was going to deliver her first baby after 20 years of marriage. She was no longer young, therefore Andrew understood that the baby was very precious to the family. He knew he would have to save both the mother and the baby for the family's happiness. Dr. Andrew soon discovered how tough the task was. Mrs. Morgan started sinking and the child looked as if it was stillborn. He gave the baby to the midwife. Midwife means a nurse, and concentrated on reviving the mother. When he had secured the mother's life, he turned to save the child. Working with great dedication and bringing his experience and knowledge to the fore, he was able to revive the child. So he was successful in reviving the child. What qualities help Andrew Manson help Morgan family? Andrew Manson helped the Morgan family by saving the lives of Mrs. Morgan and her baby, which was very important. Dr. Andrew Manson was a competent and determined man. He would not give up. He was intelligent and bold enough to try unconventional ways. Dr. Andrew Manson had to help Mrs. Morgan in childbirth. He struggled with the case. The baby was born seemingly lifeless. Dr. Andrew gave the baby to the midwife and turned his attention to the mother who was sinking. Dr. Andrew worked relentlessly and pulled her out of danger. He then turned his attention to the baby. He understood that its condition was due to asphyxia. That means he could not get the supply of oxygen which is required for breathing. He remembered an unconventional treatment and took the bold decision to try it out. He immersed the baby alternately in icy and hot water. Thus, due to the competence, determination and willingness to take bold decisions, Dr. Andrew Manson was able to save the mother and the child. The next question, children. Why was Joe Morgan relieved to see Andrew? Did Andrew justify his hope? Joe Morgan was walking up and down the road waiting for Dr. Andrew to arrive from work. Joe Morgan's wife was about to deliver a baby. She was not young. They had been married for over 20 years. And this was their first child. He didn't want to take any risk and wanted to make sure that everything went on smoothly. Andrew took charge of the patient and reassured Joe Morgan and an old woman in the house. After some struggle, the child was born lifeless and the mother started sinking. Andrew first revived her, then took the child who the nurse had put under the bed as dead. With great effort, he was able to revive the child. Andrew's visit to the Morgans gave him pleasure and satisfaction that he had not achieved earlier. Justify. At 3:30, after an hour's difficult struggle, the child was born lifeless. Andrew attempted to revive the mother, who lay collapsed and almost pulseless. He injected the medicine and struggled to restore the lifeless Susan Morgan, and after a few minutes of intense effort, her heartbeat became steady. Andrew then turned his attention to the lifeless baby. He inferred the condition was caused by lack of oxygen in the baby's blood. He initiated the artificially induced method of respiration, pouring hot and cold water alternately for 15 minutes. Moral. The moral is that no matter how impossible a situation may seem, there is always hope to emerge victorious and prove yourself. See here in this case, Dr. Joe Morgan, he proved himself that he could emerge victorious. How? By reviving the mother and the baby. The baby was stillborn. The mother was on the verge of dying. Yes, he implied some conventional method and he was able to save both. So there is always hope, and one should be always hopeful. One should be always optimistic. How should your thinking be? Yes, I will emerge victorious. Yes, I will be able to succeed. Yes, I will be able to do it. And that is the same thing that happened in this story. As in the case of Andrew, he never gave up when he saw the stillborn child. See, Andrew, he was a young doctor. He never gave up hope. He might have thought, no, he's a stillborn child. He might have given up all hopes, and he might have just kept the stillborn child aside and told the parents that there's no hope of the child's survival. But he didn't do that. So also each life is a miracle. Here, the way he saved the small boy, that proves that the doctor was highly hopeful, he was optimistic, and he had that feeling in himself that yes, I can do it. So, children, always you also should have this kind of feeling. What? Yes, I can do it, and surely you will succeed. So, that's all for this session. Read and write whatever I have done in this session. Thank you.